In the first image, the focus shifts to a woman sitting in a state of visible tension. Her hands are tightly clasped over her knees, reflecting her inner turmoil and the weight of the request she is about to make. She addresses a man named Mr. Han, her voice filled with a mixture of desperation and respect. She begins tentatively, saying, "If you're okay with it, I'd like to ask for your help, Mr. Han." The soft lighting and her delicate posture emphasize the vulnerability of her position. The second image provides a closer look at her interlaced fingers, showing how much she is overthinking the situation. She is acutely aware of the ethical and professional boundaries she is asking him to cross. She acknowledges the unconventional nature of her plea, stating, "I know it's not exactly the kind of request I should be making to a prosecutor, but I don't have other options." The dialogue reveals that the man, Mr. Han, holds a position of high legal authority, making her request even more sensitive. In the third image, the woman continues to explain her plan, trying to provide reassurance that she has no ill intentions. She wants to use a recording for a specific purpose, but promises to handle it with the utmost discretion. She vows, "I'll play the recording only in front of Dongsong, then delete it right away without making any copies." To prove her transparency and build trust, she offers a compromise. "If you're worried, you can be there when I play it." The fourth image shows a close-up of Mr. Han's eyes, which are sharp, observant, and contemplative. He is listening intently, weighing the consequences of her words. The woman suggests an even more secure method to put his mind at ease, proposing, "Or we can even use your phone to record it." This gesture is intended to show that she is willing to give him full control over the evidence to ensure it isn't misused. In the final image, the perspective widens to show both characters in the room. Mr. Han, seen in profile, finally speaks, raising a practical and professional concern. Despite her efforts to make the recording process secure, he questions the effectiveness of the plan itself. He asks, "Would that really do the job?" adding a layer of cold logic to the emotional atmosphere by noting, "But if it's only audio, it might not be convincing enough." His skepticism highlights the difficulty of the legal battle they are navigating. The woman pauses, her expression shifting from earnest plea to slight uncertainty as she processes the prosecutor's skepticism. She looks at him, her eyes wide and searching, while he remains partially obscured in the foreground, maintaining his professional yet intimidating presence. The atmosphere in the room grows heavy with the weight of what she is about to propose next, as she begins her reply with a soft, trailing, well... She gathers her courage to address the need for more convincing evidence. Her thoughts are laid bare in the dialogue bubbles as she explores a much more personal and potentially scandalous solution. She suggests that if visual proof is required, she is prepared to go to extremes, stating, "If we're talking a more visual proof, I can certainly pretend, so that's fine for me," before turning the implication back toward him with a pointed question. "But that might not be the case for you, right?" The impact of her suggestion hits Mr. Han instantly, visualized by a sharp ping sound effect above his head. His composed professional mask slips for the first time, replaced by a look of pure, wide-eyed bewilderment. A single bead of sweat rolls down his face as he stares at her, completely caught off guard by the audacity of her proposal to pretend in a visual recording with him. As the silence stretches between them, Mr. Han's shock turns into a defensive internal monologue. The narrative focus shifts to his torso as he likely crosses his arms or tenses up, his mind racing to interpret her words. He begins to wonder if her lack of hesitation stems from a lack of faith in his masculinity, indignantly asking himself, "Is she indirectly calling me impotent?" The sequence concludes with a close-up of the woman's face, which is now flushed with a pink hue of embarrassment, yet her brow is furrowed with genuine worry. She seems to have misinterpreted his shocked silence as a sign of his own physical or emotional insecurity. Looking down with a pained, empathetic expression, she wonders to herself if he could really perform the task with that face, her worried internal state creating a hilarious and awkward misunderstanding of his actual reaction. The man runs a hand through his hair, a gesture of deep frustration and weariness. He lets out a heavy sigh, his eyes closed as he processes the situation. He thinks to himself that hearing such words from Nayeong was entirely predictable, yet it clearly still weighs on him. A close-up focuses on his broad chest and the sharp lines of his dress shirt, emphasizing his physical presence. The inner monologue continues with a cold, introspective realization. He admits to himself that he truly never felt a single spark or connection with her, highlighting the emotional void that has defined their relationship up to this point. The focus shifts to a tight, intense close-up of his eyes. There is a sharp, calculating glance as he begins to pivot his thoughts. The word "but" hangs in the air, signaling a turning point. He is no longer just reflecting on the past. He is starting to evaluate the person standing right in front of him with newfound scrutiny. We see Miss So-young, her face flushed with a slight blush, and her expression filled with a mix of anxiety and uncertainty. A bead of sweat trickles down her face as she waits for his reaction. Above her, the man's internal narrative concludes with a shift in perspective. This might be different. He is beginning to see her not just as another person, but as someone who might actually break his streak of indifference. The scene transitions to a wide view of a sprawling city at night, shimmering with countless lights through a large window. The man's voice breaks the silence, speaking aloud now. He sets a challenge for her, addressing her formally. Then, let's see if you can actually pretend, Miss So-young. He makes his terms clear. Before he commits to working with her, he needs proof that she is a believable actress capable of playing the part he requires. Miss So-young agrees to the man's challenge, but with a slight hesitation. She reaches out, her hand trembling slightly as she prepares to take a seat at the table. To calm her nerves and build up the courage for the performance ahead, she makes a small request. "Very well, but first, I'd like a drink. It's hard to do this sober." The man remains composed and unbothered by her request. As she reaches for a bottle of whiskey, he gives her his permission with a nonchalant wave of his hand. "Do whatever makes you comfortable," he replies, his voice steady. The label on the bottle is clear, indicating a strong drink for someone clearly out of their element. Without a second thought, Miss So-young tilts her head back and begins to chug the drink in large, desperate gulps. The man watches her from across the table, his arms crossed over his chest in a skeptical posture. He watches her with a judgmental eye, thinking to himself that, based on his earlier observations, she clearly isn't much of a drinker. Predictably, the strong alcohol hits her system immediately. The panel shows her coughing and choking as the liquid goes down the wrong way. She gasps out between fits of coughing. The man watches the scene with a tired, almost bored expression, his inner monologue sighing, "There she goes again," as if her clumsiness is becoming a pattern. Despite the chaos, a small, knowing smirk plays on the man's lips. He looks at her with a mix of amusement and a hint of a challenge. He leans in slightly, his tone teasing as he remarks, "Had I known you liked to drink, I would have given it to you straight." He seems to be enjoying her struggle, using the moment to keep her off balance before their work truly begins. The evening takes an awkward turn as the young woman finds herself under a watchful gaze. She lets out a light, nervous cough, her cheeks flushed with a soft pink hue, perhaps from the alcohol or the mounting embarrassment. Looking downward to avoid direct eye contact, she quickly tries to justify herself. "No, it's not that I like drinking," she murmurs, her voice trailing off as she attempts to downplay her current state. Despite her protests, the alcohol is clearly beginning to take its toll. She sits with a pained expression, one eye squinting as a sharp pang of discomfort hits her. Her hand trembles slightly as she grips a glass of amber liquid, the condensation slick against her skin. A single bead of sweat rolls down her temple, signaling that she has reached her limit, yet she remains stuck in the moment, struggling to maintain her composure. In a sharp contrast to her visible distress, the scene shifts to a close-up of her companion. Only the lower half of his face is visible, a sharp jawline and a mouth set in a firm, inscrutable line. He remains silent, offering no words of comfort or judgment, represented only by an ellipsis in a thought bubble. His stoic presence adds a layer of tension to the room, leaving her words hanging heavily in the air. The world begins to tilt. The woman reaches up, pressing her palm against her forehead as if she could physically steady the spinning room. I feel dizzy, she thinks to herself, her eyelids drooping with exhaustion. She is no longer concerned with appearances. Her body is heavy, and the bright, modern interior of the room feels like it's closing in on her. The dizziness has become overwhelming, stripping away the last of her energy. The sequence ends with a quiet, decisive sound. With a shaky hand, she finally sets her glass down on the table with a dull clink. The frame focuses on her slumped posture as she sits on the edge of the plush chair, her fingers splayed weakly against the surface. The thought bubble reveals her inner regret. I thought the alcohol would help, but now I've just got a headache. It is a moment of somber realization. The temporary escape she sought has only left her feeling worse than before. The silence is finally broken, but not with the comfort she hoped for. The man looms over her, his broad shoulders filling her field of vision as he poses a question that carries a heavy weight of expectation. "So, are you ready now?" he asks. His tone is calm, yet the directness of the inquiry catches her off guard, forcing her to look up at him through a haze of physical discomfort and mounting anxiety. Caught in the spotlight of his gaze, she falters. Her hand instinctively rises toward her chest, a defensive gesture as she tries to find the right words to navigate the situation. Well, she begins, her sentence trailing off into uncertainty. Her expression is a mix of apprehension and hesitation. She is clearly looking for an escape, or at the very least, a way to slow down the relentless pace of the evening. The world continues to spin, represented by the swirling, wavy patterns in the background, and the word dizzy floating in her mind. A deep flush has spread across her cheek, but it's no longer just the alcohol, it's the intrusive thought of what is about to happen. To think I'm about to do something like that with him, she thinks, her internal monologue filled with a sense of disbelief and overwhelming pressure. The reality of her situation is finally sinking in, clashing with her physical weakness. Her focus narrows as her strength continues to wane. The camera zooms in on her collarbone and the soft curve of her neck, highlighting her vulnerability. She can barely manage a whisper, a simple escaping her lips. The dizziness is no longer a background sensation, it is a primary force, making every thought and every word feel like an immense struggle as she remains trapped in the gravity of his presence. The tension reaches a breaking point as her internal panic manifests physically. Her hands rest on the table, but they are far from steady. A sharp rattle sound effect emphasizes her uncontrollable shivering. The glass sits nearby, a reminder of the drink that failed to steady her nerves. Finally, she manages to voice a desperate request, her words appearing in a speech bubble. "If you could give me more time." It is a fragile plea for a reprieve, a hope that she can delay the inevitable for just a little longer. A moment of elegance is suddenly shattered by a clumsy mistake. Miss So-young's eyes widen in sheer panic as she realizes what has happened. She clutches her hand to her chest, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Uh-oh," she gasps, looking down at the mess on the floor. Oh, the whiskey. The realization that she has spilled a drink in such a formal setting sends a wave of anxiety through her. Trying to maintain her composure, So-young immediately moves to rectify the situation. Her expression softens into one of sincere regret as she leans slightly forward, her long, wavy auburn hair cascading over her shoulders. She speaks quickly, hoping to minimize the disturbance. "I'm sorry. Let me clean that up." Despite her poise, the small beads of sweat on her face betray how flustered she truly feels. Before she can move to clean the spill, a deep, commanding voice cuts through the air, stopping her in her tracks. The tone is firm and carries an undeniable weight of authority. "Miss So-young," the man says, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. "I'm not the patient type." The words hang heavy in the air, shifting the atmosphere from a simple accident to a moment of intense tension. So-young freezes, her breath hitching in her throat. She looks up, her gaze meeting the man who has now stepped firmly into her personal space. From her perspective, he appears towering and formidable, his hand resting heavily on a nearby surface. All she can manage to whisper is a faint, "Ah," as she realizes that his lack of patience might lead to consequences far more serious than a spilled drink. The silence that follows is punctuated only by the heavy, rhythmic sound of footsteps. Clump, clump. The man turns and begins to walk away, his stride purposeful and intimidating. He leaves his sentence trailing off, "So why don't you?" leaving the rest of the threat or demand unspoken. The sound of his boots echoing against the floor signals the end of the encounter, leaving So-young alone with her thoughts and the mess she is yet to clean. The scene begins with a moment of sharp, jarring movement. A large sound effect, yank, dominates the frame as the woman is suddenly pulled forward. Her eyes are wide with shock, her pupils dilated as she tries to process the abrupt change in her surroundings. Her mouth hangs slightly open, capturing the breathless surprise of the moment. The perspective shifts to a wide shot against the backdrop of a glittering city skyline at night. The man has cornered the woman against a large glass window, his silhouette imposing, yet desperate. He leans in close, his arm raised and pressed against the glass to block her path, effectively trapping her in his space. An exclamation mark in a speech bubble highlights her stunned silence as the tension between them reaches a breaking point. The tension finally snaps into action. The man leans down, tilting his head to close the distance and pressing his lips against hers. It is a firm, emotional kiss. The woman's eyes remain open for a heartbeat, flickering with a mix of surprise and rising emotion. The soft, purple-hued lighting of the room enhances the intimacy of the embrace. The focus tightens into an extreme close-up of the kiss. The sound effect, chew, the light sound of a kiss, appears above them. This frame emphasizes the softness and the gravity of the physical connection, stripping away the background and focusing entirely on the intimacy of their meeting lips. As they pull apart just slightly, a heavy, shaky breath escapes. The man's internal thoughts, or perhaps a whispered question, appear in a jagged speech bubble. Stop talking? It suggests that the kiss was a way to silence the words that were causing pain or conflict between them, replacing an argument with a raw display of affection. Finally, the man is shown in a close-up, looking directly at the woman and the reader. His face is flushed with a deep blush, and his expression is a complex mix of intensity, longing, and vulnerability. His shirt is slightly disheveled at the collar, and his eyes are heavy with unspoken feelings, showing that he is just as affected by the moment as she is.